Welcome to the panel. This is a panel on bottom of the pyramid innovation, and I'm really thrilled to have a terrific cross section of people over here. You're going to have a very engaging conversation, and what I'd like to do is quickly kind of introduce the people that we have on the panel. Encourage all of you all to look up the details. If I were to go through the details, we'd spend half the session just going over the backgrounds because they have such a rich and diverse set of backgrounds. So let me start at that end. We have Manu Prakash. He's an assistant professor at Stanford in the Department of Bioengineering. Manu has just returned from a jaunt out in Costa Rica, and we're really thankful that he made it back safely. So Manu when we get around, he'll tell you a little bit more of what he does. After Manu, we have Arman Nukermans. And Arman has been a high-tech entrepreneur, and he was the resident director of Jaipur Fort. Right after Arman, we have Krista Donaldson. Krista is the CEO of DREV, and DREV is involved in a number of medical devices, taking them from idea to scaling up. And we'll hear about some of the things they're doing and how they've gone out and implemented them. And then finally, to my immediate right, we have been very fortunate that Raghu, he literally was on a plane last night coming in from India. So thanks for making it over today. Raghu Dharmaraj. He's the Chief Operating Officer of Embrace. And Embrace is, again, a very interesting technology that you'll hear a little bit more about. So what I wanted to do today was, given that this is a conference that's sitting right in the panel that's sitting right in the middle of the IIT conference, is talk about innovation, talk about the challenges that are out there in the world, and how can, what are some of the ways that people are addressing them? And what are they doing to take not just the ideas, it's great to come up with the ideas, but how do you take those ideas and actually go out, implement and scale and make sure that impact happens? And so we have some wonderful examples over here. I will ask on them. And I've asked them to prepare for this to think about three things. One is, what is the one exciting thing that they're working on or they've been working on, and why is it exciting? What is it that it's trying to do? The other one is, what are some of the challenges and lessons that they've learned as they've been going out and implementing it? And then, what can we learn from those lessons? How do you go out and take those ideas and actually make sure impact happens? Because eventually, if it is just an academic exercise, you're not really going to have anything happen out there. So what is it that you need to do to make sure that impact happens? And then eventually, we keep talking about the bottom of the pyramid. And for people who are not familiar with it, that was coined about 10 years or so ago by C.K. Prahlad, who was a professor at University of Michigan. And at that time, his observation was that a lot of the technology and technology innovation was happening at the top of the pyramid, addressing the needs of the top of the pyramid. And for him, the pyramid was the distribution of wealth around the world. So if you look at the 6 billion or so people then, the pyramid, you had the affluent communities at the top of the pyramid consisting of maybe less than a billion people. But then the bottom of the pyramid were 2 billion people. And most of the corporations, most of the technology solutions ignored that because they didn't think there was money to be made there. And his contention was that if you apply your mind and if you apply innovation and if you come up with the right models, there is money to be made over there, and that you can do it. And it caught on, and we have a lot of interesting ideas that have come up in the last few years. But now I think it has gone beyond that, because a lot of those ideas that people think of as the bottom of the pyramid are no longer just issues that the bottom of the pyramid are faced with. It's issues that all of us are faced with, and a lot of what we're learning there are actually being applied across the world. So what you see some of these examples, even though we talk of the bottom of the pyramid, it's actually challenges that we face as humanity, and we can apply them whether you're sitting over here or whether you're sitting in India. So the third part that I'm going to ask them to think about is, okay, how do these solutions address us or the West or the rest of the world? So it's not just the bottom of the pyramid. So with that, I want to just open up with quick question to all of them, and we can go left to right, starting from that end, coming down here. What is the one thing that you're working on that is really getting you excited, Why are you excited about it, and what do you think is the impact that it's going to do or have? When do you want to start?
So can you hear me at the back?
I think you need the mic.
Or do I need this?
Yeah, the room kind of dampens.
I am the academic that Raj was mentioning about a second ago. And asking an academic, one thing that we're working on is kind of a tough challenge. But maybe I'll give you just a context of how we think about problems. I'm a faculty at Stanford. The space that we work on, we call it frugal science. The idea is, information is cheap, is going to become available for free to everyone in the world, primarily because of people like you. Experience is not. And one of the contexts that we work in the global health space, we make all kinds of medical instruments, diagnostics specifically, that we take out. And just the context of sitting in Cameroon trying to explain to somebody that germ theory exists, that the fact that you should actually believe in this and actually go see a doctor, or this diagnostics has any meaning even to begin with, is a very hard challenge. So it's not just about technology, it's really also about changing perceptions. So the approach we've taken is we make tools for curiosity, primarily the types of tools that we make, and one tool that I brought along with me, anybody can come and play with. We started building microscopes because they have an immense importance in diagnosing infectious diseases, all the way from malaria that you've all heard of to neglected tropical diseases that very few people hear about. And the perspective of this is really trying to think about build tools that can scale. This is an instrument that we made that cost us around 50 to 97 cents to manufacture. We made 50,000 of these, shipped them around the world to 130 countries, and now we have our own clinical trials, but we're also just watching what other people are doing with the same sets of tools. So I'll just leave there, but one of the perspectives that I want to bring to the table is thinking a little bit about, there are tools that are needed in global health and problem solving, but an important connection that's needed is how do you bring the next generation to own those problems? Because as many panels as we want to have here will not actually tackle all the problems.
Great. So Armand, you've been involved, for a while with a number of interesting things, but one of them was your experience in India with the Jaipur foot. So what would you say? What's the one single thing that got you excited about it?
So I was a physicist and an engineer and an entrepreneur in a different life about years ago. And then I got involved in a project that was with MRI for landmines. It looked very interesting. We make this for a couple of K and normally it's 100K. Said that the only problem is at that time the landmines started going off in the IDE started going off in Iraq, and the government wouldn't give us any license anymore to export this. So we spent 5 years lawyering, which was not very pleasant. But I sort of got interested in the project of amputees, and so by accident we had a little fund at Castilleja where my wife used to teach, and he was invited. And he was first very reluctant to stay with his sort of American family, but it worked out wonderfully, and so we've been great friends ever since. And so he says, look, we have this knee and it's not working very well. Could you get us something getting at Stanford? And I said, well, yeah, sure, they'll jump on it. Well, it didn't actually work out that way. They didn't jump on it. It took a lot of conviction, but they actually took it over then with great zest. And so course was organized, and remarkably for very little money, basically 6 months later, 2 or 3 students had designed this knee, and it was being tested after 3 months in Jaipur, and by 6 months we thought it was final, etc. So that was a great success because Jaipur Foot is a wonderful lab. I could tell that if this had been designed and brought to the International Red Cross, it would still be sitting on the shelf. There is just no question about it. And there it was in the hands of amputees basically 2 days after it arrived, and that was really a success. So 6 or 7 years later now, there's 7,400. I talked to Mr. Mehta this morning, 4,000 in operation. So that was very rewarding. Not everything is that rewarding, actually, even in this field. What I actually do now is very different. I somehow 7 years ago, I got dragged into a project to make the clouds wider over the ocean. And what is this relevant to this field? Well, it's very relevant because if we don't get global warming under control, the ones that are going to suffer the earliest and the ones that are going to suffer the most are the ones at the bottom of the pyramid. And as you all know, we no longer have a pyramid. We have a cusp-shaped figure. It's no longer a pyramid. It's very thin at the top and very broad at the bottom. So that's a different problem, which we're still struggling with. We're almost there, but it's going to still take a while. So that's what I do on and off.
That's your current focus.
Thank you.
Right.
I
Krista.
still work with people, of course.
Right. So Krista kind of logically kind of followed. I think one of the things you're working on is the Jaipur thing, but you got some other interesting things down the pipe too, right?
So I'll pick up where Arvind left off. This was actually the original knee from the Jaipur Foot Organization. So and I'm happy to pass these around, but the thing to notice when we pass it around is that it's a single axis knee, so it rotates just around a single axis. So you lose stability once the knee bends. But do you want to be my Vanna? And then this is the Jaipur knee that the students developed. And where DREV, my organization, steps in is that we absorbed that student team and we acquired the IP in Silicon Valley speak. But what that really means is that we absorbed this team, no one made any money, but we are now taking the knee to scale. And I have some other prototypes here. This was the next version. And this is the version now that we're actually bringing to global scale. So you can see the iteration. And while this took 6 months, this is now looking at 5 years. But a little bit about my organization. DREV is a nonprofit. It's short for Design Revolution. We're based in San Francisco, but we work with partners globally, but really mostly in India. And it's because India is our target market for several of our devices. And we focus on medical devices, and our goal is to help to end health inequities. And 3 things just to know about how we approach it. We're not your typical nonprofit or charity. We take a market-driven approach, meaning that all of our products are sold through the market. So actually most of our buyers don't even know that a nonprofit's behind it. They just see this like hopefully beautiful product that's very affordably priced. That also means that all the profit margins are built in. So DREV can exit and the product will keep scaling and reach high-need hospitals and clinics. The second thing is that we develop world-class products and getting away from this whole appropriate technology movement where low quality was good enough for poor people. We believe that regardless of your income, you deserve a high-quality, high-functioning, beautiful product. So it's not just us saying that. We seek regulatory approval, third-party certifications that exist to demonstrate that to our buyers, because in many cases, as you can probably guess, they don't trust the salesperson saying that this is a high-quality product. And then the third thing we say about ourselves is that we're user-obsessed. So not just the end user, but the manufacturer, the service provider, the government official who makes the tendering decision or works with the committee, everybody in the chain that is involved with either purchasing, distributing, using, family members of patients, the products. We take into account all of their products. So even though the knee is one of our products, our first product was actually phototherapy. So how many parents do we have in the room? Okay, quite a few. Did any of your children have jaundice? Okay, a few. Okay, you're a little bit below average. I'm sure that's the only way you're below average, but it's so if you have jaundice, blue light shining through the baby's skin breaks down a neurotoxin called bilirubin, and the baby pees it out. Very simple. But those blue lights are actually very expensive, or they tend to be very low quality. We developed with Phoenix Medical Systems based in Chennai a state-of-the-art phototherapy device that's about $400, depending on where the rupee is. A standard device is $3,000 or more. It's now sold in 30 countries. We target specifically high-income or low-income, high-need hospitals.
Great.
So I'll leave it there.
Okay, great. So Raghu, you have something interesting sitting in front over there. So tell us a little bit about what it is and how did you get into that?
Yeah, so by the way, our founders, 4 of them met at the Stanford D School in a class called Design for Extreme Affordability. And they were asked to make a cheap incubator. Turned out, cheap incubator really was not what's needed, right? In fact, you have lots of incubators if you go around many emerging markets where incubators and radiant warmers are used as bookshelves. So what's the real problem, right? The real problem turned out to be infrastructure. You don't have continuous high wattage power. You don't have skilled staff that can actually operate those complicated machines. So we came up with this. What is this? This is a wax, a phase change material that melts at your body temperature, right? Now you heat this using either hot water or intermittent power. You have these battery systems wherever you go in India, right? And you throw this in. Now you put the baby here. Now the baby is warm for several hours, right? Now, of course, a very clever idea, but as Krista here can tell us, she's actually done it more smartly than us. This is a very different form factor than an incubator or a radiant warmer. So how the heck does it get adopted? And that's where I came in. I basically joined the journey. What got me excited was all these medical devices typically take a decade or more to trickle down into emerging markets and then into the primary health centers. Can you actually launch directly and develop directly for emerging markets was the challenge. There have been lots of ups and downs since then. First I introduced it in private market, then the public health markets. Now we've helped around 150,000 babies across 11 countries. So that's been the journey. What are we working on that's really exciting? I think overall journey of what we've done is, this was something, warming was available only in the NICUs, neonatal ICUs, right? You're not going to build enough NICUs or have enough neonatologists or specialized nurses. So can we de-skill healthcare and bring more and more of these, what was seen as specialized technologies, into the hands of mothers and healthcare workers, of which we have a lot. And that's really the challenge.
Great. So, both you and Krista, taken this idea, and I'm assuming this is a commercial production. You've now got distributed in a number of different places. What's the first step? How do you take it out of the idea phase, and then, especially when you're looking at a developing market, right? What's the first step? How do you get started? What are the challenges then in building? From what I think, just building the product is just tip of the iceberg, right? The whole distribution support structure. What was the first step you guys had to take?
See, so really the way you got to think about it is that you have all these great concepts. Anyone heard of design thinking? Lean startup, anyone? Right. So these don't apply just to technology, right? These also apply to your business model, right? So you got to really build your product and business at the same time. At times we weren't actually, when we started, we weren't exactly smart about it. We have learned since then. So this is something we do. We do market pilots early on. As far as you take the medical risk out through clinical trials and do it under strict ethics committee supervision, IRBs and all that, right? But there is ways to interact not just with your end user, especially in space like this. It's not often the end user that might be buying it, right? You got to figure out the ecosystem of how you are actually going to distribute and get adoption. For us, it has meant a lot of working with doctors closely, bureaucrats closely, doing pilots, and those sort of things, right? And you got to think about the cost that will add to the product, and not just about just making this physically. I'm sure Krista will have more.
I think I'm going to give a simpler answer in the sense that I'm even going to go before the idea. I think it's very important to identify the problem and to really understand what the problem you're solving is. I see, particularly in international development or even in technology, and I think we can have a good debate about that here in Silicon Valley, about what need products are addressing. And with all of the products we do, they were identified by users on the ground. And I think this is particularly important in the global health arena, because typically in global health, the experts kind of look at what the data says and decide where money should go. And we believe very strongly in doctors identifying problems. And actually that's how the need for our phototherapy device, Brilliance, was identified. That an Indian doctor, actually we were hanging out at the Embrace booth at a conference several years ago, and the doctor said, you should integrate phototherapy. And at the time the Embrace team was like, let's just get this to market, which tells you a little bit about the whole path, the whole journey. But we looked into it more, talked to that doctor, started doing field work, talking to more doctors, and learned that actually it's a huge problem. And it's not something that people think about in the West. And it's because, when you deliver a baby at Stanford Hospital or in Santa Clara, there's a pinprick on the heel, it gets sent off for blood analysis, and you get a result very quickly. And that's not what happens in district hospitals or in community health clinics, for example, in India. And even when the tests come back, I've talked to a lot of doctors, even when the tests do come back, if there is a blood test, they don't trust the results. So there's a whole kind of variety of problems, but we started very much at the ground level. And if we switch over to this, our knee, and the knee's coming to market right now, but it was identified by the Jaipur Foot Organization. They said that, you know, we have this lower performance knee, we want to remobilize amputees. We have a whole population of amputees who live on less than $4 a day, and right now they're just using a bamboo staff. And you can imagine if you're using a bamboo staff, you already are losing one hand to carry things, and to do work, to do all these sorts of different things. And so I would say start with really, really understanding the problem before even starting to jump into conceptual design.
Great. Manu, on your end of this thing, I mean, you're now at a point where you've done some prototypes and pilots with this. What's the next step over there? How do you take that and really get impact out there to happen? What are you thinking about?
So for us, there are several different problems that we're working on, but one of the contexts that we started with this, I'll just specifically talk about microscopy-based diagnostics, has been identifying the idea that eventually the classic way that you think about this research microscope sitting on a thing, we were out in Thailand actually doing this, and we realized that the actual health worker that was supposed to use this fancy, beautiful fluorescence microscope, his annual salary was 1/4 of one of the objectives. And so, of course, he would never even touch it. How do you learn how to fly a plane if you're never going to actually sit in a cockpit? And microscopy is the same thing. So one of the contexts that we realized early on is this notion of building instruments that are very disease-specific. So we have identified 4 or 5 very specific diseases that each one of these instruments are specifically optimized to operate. We have 2 clinical studies now, one in Ghana, another one coming out of Kenya, looking at schistosomiasis and a couple other infectious diseases. So for us now, the next challenge is scale up. The first thing that we did in the lab itself was build robotics to be able to manufacture the first 50,000 units. You know, I didn't fold these by myself, sitting in the corner, although we are just 2 people. But what that allowed us to do is to validate this idea that it's not just an idea in vacuum, that we can actually manufacture this. One of the contexts for us is to make something sustainable, and a slightly broader goal, because I think one of the big challenges that all diagnostics faces, especially when you're truly in the place where, you know, this doesn't need a power source, we are really targeting not even hospitals, but primary healthcare centers. That's where infectious disease has its highest burden. So for us, a bigger challenge kind of globally comes from the fact that we made this realization that eventually from early on, what we would like is every single kid in the world to actually grow up with microscopy as a concept. And this is the connection for sustainability for us to really tie in science education and healthcare. So the instruments that we make for healthcare don't look so attractive and appealing. They're not designed for you to rip apart and open, but the instruments that we make, these 50,000 units are in schools around the world. They are really about, you hack, you build. So what we're trying to do is build a business model around this notion that the people who can afford to pay actually pay for people who can't afford to pay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So great. Arman, you had looked at, the Jaipur, when you were working with Jaipur, some of the challenges over there in terms of actual implementation, right?
Well, in our particular case, this was very, very simple because, it was a great success. We sent the student there after 3 months, it works. So they go back 3 months later and it works even better. And from there on it was downhill. I can guarantee you, I've never had another project that worked that well, even professionally. It just doesn't happen. So it's very, very different when like Krista, you take this and you want to do this at scale in other parts of the world, essentially, where you don't have this support. And there are many factors that come in this. For example, one is cultural, and I may digress here a little bit. But I have a good friend, Anil Chitrakar, who was very active in Nepal. And he actually is responsible for the rural, he was an engineer, for the rural electrification of Nepal. And so the World Bank was going to build a big dam there, which is going to cost $4 or $5 billion, and dam this whole valley, a beautiful valley, and then they were going to transport the electricity over other mountains to, wherever it was needed. And he said, well, this is ridiculous. This doesn't work like this here in Nepal. So he convinced them, after 3 or 4 years, essentially, to take his thing, which is build small dams, essentially, and all of these things, and it's local and everything like that. So this project, at a quarter or a third of the, or half the cost, in a quarter of the time was finished, and it was great. Now, the greatest difficulty, he says, was to convince the farmers that after you use this water to make electricity, that it still had the power to grow rice. You know, this is something that we sort of think as, well, I mean, obviously it doesn't. These are the cultural kind of things that you run into. And that is very important. And on a different level, I have a good friend, Balamanian, that I presume many of you know, very famous in the Valley and also in India. And so he was making this company with very advanced medical products, and some of them extraordinary in India. And the question that he was asked is, do you sell this in the United States? And he says, well, that's not our market. Well, if you don't sell it there, it can't be any good. And this is the kind of thing that you run into and that you really have to understand through and through the cultural implications. For example, this class that you referred to at Stanford, where Embrace came out, they came out with this LED light, right? Great idea. Well, it failed 2 or 3 times because they didn't have the right model. And so, cultural model, while Anil, who knows this, you know, he knew what he needed, he went basically viral from the very first time. So it's really, you have to know the environment that you're working. And so when I don't have to do it, I stay out of it. I tell the people what they're doing.
Yeah. In fact, I think the point you just made about the cultural sensitivities, I think both Raghu and Krista, you had some comments to say about it too, right? Into the challenges and how tough was it to try and convince people to use that thing that you have, which looks so different than, you know, the big high-tech, high-cost items that they're used to, right?
See, the healthcare worker in a PHC or a sub-center in remote Rajasthan, it was very easy because she had never been exposed to this fancy incubator. In fact, I have a video, if anyone's interested, where I go present it to her, and under 5 minutes, she's training a whole bunch of what you call ASHA workers, right? It was just incredible. But then, for her to have the power to use this, turns out I need to get everyone above her all the way to the health secretary and the doctors in AIMS to sign off on it. So when I go to the doctor in AIMS, he says, well, this doesn't have that, it doesn't have this, it doesn't have this. We had done clinical trials, but still, just the mental model of what a device that provides warmth should be is so very different. So the challenges there for me have been in doing pilots. Next time someone says a pilot, I'll just jump off a cliff, right? Because now I need to prove to them that water boils in their backyard too, right? So that's the sort of thing. So lots of pilots, patience, right? And finding, while the government system doesn't allow it to actually adopt innovations, there are lots of willing people. The processes don't allow it. So find the right advocates and then figure out the process. I wouldn't say we actually have figured it out quite fully yet because, for example, today government is my largest customer, and that's amazing that I say that. At the same time, that's not actually the best thing because I'm waiting for payments 120 days or 6 months after I've actually sold to them.
Just give us a sense, Raghu, in terms of scale, like when you say government is your biggest customer,
So we have a few thousand units out in India across 14 states. Different states have adopted it at different scales right now. You can go from Meghalaya or Manipur all the way to Kerala. Kerala turned out to be actually the first adopter.
Yeah. So, and the one thing I think I take away from this is, you know, even looking at the folderscope and the Embrace thing that you have is that, innovation, when you bring innovation to solve these problems, they're not necessarily going to look, the solutions are not going to look like what people saw in the past.
Can I talk a little bit about that? Yeah. Roger and I were having a great conversation before the panel started. When we were doing early user testing on Brilliance, the phototherapy device, we had some really cool, innovative designs. Like, we actually had a pacifier that had a blue light in it that the baby could suck on, and it's because the blood vessels are closer inside the mouth to the surface. But of course, many of us, particularly her mothers, like I am, were a little bit, like we were happy that prototype didn't go through. But the point was is that the doctors actually looked at this range of prototypes, one that would go under the baby's knees, and said, you know what, we don't want these kind of novel devices. We want something like what we know phototherapy looks like. So we actually designed a very solid, looks like a good phototherapy device. And it's not to say we didn't have challenges. We used LEDs. Most of the devices in public hospitals and many hospitals, particularly in India, use compact fluorescent tube bulbs. And so a lot of doctors were saying, well, when are the LEDs going to need to be replaced? And we said, they won't need to be replaced. And they're like, no, but when are they going to need to be replaced? And then we realized the answer is in 10 years or 30 years. We had to give a answer because the mind was around when do the bulbs need to be replaced. And what was happening with phototherapy devices up to that point is they had 6 bulbs and they needed to be replaced every 3 to 5 months. That gets very expensive. It's often also difficult to source. But one thing that's really neat is that we've seen our doctors become much more sophisticated over the years I've been working, and we introduced Brilliance Pro, which is the next generation Brilliance, earlier this year, and it is very slick. Wired called it actually the Air Mac of phototherapy devices. Who knew a phototherapy devices had a classification? And it actually won Best Product at NeoCon, India's biggest neonatal conference across all product categories. And doctors were over the moon about it. And the response we got is finally someone's designing beautiful products for us. And we love that there's LEDs. So you can see this change happening in the market, and that's one of the things that is so dynamic for me in the markets that we work in, because there's this desire for better, and doctors and people are seeing better and better products, but wanting them to come into their hospitals and having the opportunity to get them.
Great. So I'm going to ask one last question off the panel, but in the meantime, I want you guys to kind of start thinking about questions that you might want to ask. And we're going to use the app, so you have them up there. Oh, okay, great, wonderful. So the last question I'm going to ask is, what's the bigger context of all of this? We said, it's not the bottom of the pyramid, right? I mean, so how is what you're doing applicable to things beyond just where you started? What are you doing something about it? Are there opportunities out there? And how can people over here get excited about that? Because most people have this bicameral kind of thinking, right? They think wonderful things happen over here, and the stuff that's happening over there is, like you were saying, it's people think it's low cost, it's low quality, and things like that, as opposed to all the innovation that's happening everywhere else, right? So what do we learn from what you've done that applies over here?
We are just launching a consumer version of this product in the US as we speak. So definitely it was not people use reverse innovation as a term. I actually do not like it, right? I don't know how going from east to west is reverse, or coming from west to east is the right direction, right? So one is once you build solutions for markets such as India and Africa, I think there is incredible applicability to bring those back and disrupt markets here. We are also looking at launching this in the medical space here. Cost $5,000 for 1 day in NICU.
My goal, and particularly at our organization, is to solve problems, like to end brain damage happening from jaundice, to remobilize everyone in the world so that they can have jobs and go back to school if they previously couldn't. We'll do this through direct impact of our products, but I think the real big global change comes from changing industries. And I think there's something to be said for designing for scale globally, not just people who can pay or high-income people, but designing for global scale from the very beginning, because it benefits everyone. Without distinction of your income level or where you live.
Right. Anything else to add?
So I was going to try to elaborate a different aspect, So we're talking like information is flowing from, America or the West to third world countries. You have to realize that very soon this is going to reverse, and it's very important that it's going to reverse. If you look, for example, there was an article in The Economist about 2-3 years ago. The Western telecoms, they go to Africa to see what models they use, for a few dollars here and there, essentially. And they're much more advanced in the use of these economic models for the telephone business than we are. And I can sort of very easily imagine that this gets in the hand of some Indian kids, and they think of applications which we have never thought of. And this is very important, because the West can't keep on living the way that we're living. You know, somewhere at the end of the 1980s, the people that study sustainability, they said, look, we took more out of the earth than we put in. Okay. So this is also the World Bank guy from Europe. This is not some academic. So by 2050, we're going to need about 2.3 times the earth that we use now if we keep living the way that we are. But something's going to give. It's very obvious. And this doesn't even involve climate change, right? So this is just the way that we're doing. So we have the solution that this is going to provide and integrate this in our Western way of living, or we're not going to make it. It's that simple.
Yeah, that's definitely the challenge. Yeah.
So I'll just resonate this and maybe say something very quick, which you brought up. We have a very simple goal. We don't think of, we're going to design for India and Africa and US. It doesn't work like that. You're trying to solve a problem. The way we kind of think of this instrument is a pencil of microscopy. You know, when somebody came up with a pencil, it was to try to solve a problem. And that's the type of scale that we think about. A very simple version of this is it's extremely important to connect that problem solving to the number of problems we're talking about is 0.0001% of the actual problems that exist on this planet right now that needs to be solved. So it's an immensely important challenge to figure out how are we training people to own these problems. And this is something that we think a lot about in all the work we do.
Right.
Just
yeah, go ahead.
I can add a thought. There are many of you are IITians, so I'm going to just make a general appeal to IITians. Silicon Valley is cool. It's absolutely irreplaceable. But the kind of challenges the world has, right? You can build cool startups anywhere. We live in an incredibly connected world, right? So this is a general appeal for you to look for problems beyond your next marketplace in the valley, right? There's lots of problems out there. And I can tell you it's a very rewarding. I mean, Embrace for me is sort of the 4th impact technology I've launched. And it's challenging, you'll have your lows, but I'll tell you, it gives you an incredible high when you see a baby using your product or you helping bring energy for some remote corners. So take the journey, take the plunge.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I think just listening to some of the people in the hallway, I think a lot of people are going through that kind of transition in their thinking, and I hope this panel has been inspirational in terms of what are the opportunities out there and how we can do stuff. I'm going to take a couple of these questions and kind of combine them, in the limited time we have. So a couple of the questions, are deal with business model. We haven't talked about that. I know, Manu, you're still thinking about it, but if I just throw it open to the panel, how are you set up? How are you structured? You're a nonprofit, for-profit, and how do you make money? Where do you get the money from? Are you funded by a foundation? Do you look to investors? You want to deal with those questions?
I'll start. Yeah. So I mentioned DREV is a nonprofit. It's not obvious. We look much more like a medical device company. We raise philanthropic funds for R&D. So once the product hits the market, it's got to survive on its own if we've designed it really well. And to give you a sense of our costs, it took about $1.5 million to get Brilliance to market, which I'm really proud of that we're in 30 countries on $1.5 million with regulatory approval from Europe.
So the partner, how do you get the partner involved,
Great
and how do
question,
they
yeah.
get excited about it? You have a joint business model?
We do. Well, so we license the technology, the intellectual property to Phoenix, our partner in Chennai. We identified them from talking to doctors. We asked them, who responds to servicing calls quickly? Which devices do you like? What are the quality devices? And Phoenix rose to the top of the list, even above all the multinationals and everything. And then I approached the MD, Sashi Kumar, very early on when we had proof of concept. And he was really excited about it. He knew the medical device industry was changing towards more affordable devices, particularly globally in emerging markets. And I would say much faster than even American medical device companies wanted to jump on that very quickly. And it's been an incredible partnership. But the licensing agreement is very unique between a nonprofit and a for-profit. We structured it so that the retail price is set based on the bill of materials. And if Phoenix sells to a high-need hospital, they actually make greater royalties. So if they sell to Belgium, which just happened this last month, they owe us many more royalties than if they sell within India to public hospitals, for example.
That's great. How about you, Raghu? How are you all structured?
Yeah, we started our life as a non-profit, and then a for-profit was spun out, very similarly licensing the technology from non-profit to for-profit. We have investors such as Vinod Khosla and Mark Benioff, who have backed us as impact investors. The journey definitely hasn't been easy to sustain. We actually built our own marketing and distribution. These days now, as we go to other countries, we are partnering with a lot more distributors. We found early on, after partnering with different companies, that there's a certain kind of skin in the game you need to have to promote a product with such a different form factor. We weren't as smart as you, right? Now we are also, the product we are launching in the US is also going to, for every product we sell in the US, we are going to help one baby in emerging markets.
Great. Anything to add, Armand? Or
No, I don't. I sort of, what I'm doing now forces me to think at a different level. But basically, the bottom of the pyramid is about not giving things away. It's like the usual learning how to fish and not giving a fishing rod and all that kind of stuff. It's really, in the society that we're looking at, we're going to have to make small communities that are self-sufficient. Because in the things that we're facing, they're becoming so complex that it's hard. They're very susceptible to malfunctioning when disasters happens, as they're going to happen in the future. And we're looking at that now. We're thinking. You see this now every day. I don't know what you read, all the bad news that I read, but so Hansen, one of the preeminent physicists in this field, is now saying, well, by the end of the century, we may be looking at 10 feet of water, sea level rise, and not everybody accepts this yet, and normally it's like more or 3. But these are drastic changes from what we've done. The future is not what it used to be. And so creating small businesses which has sort of been advocated in this bottom of the pyramid and by Paul Pollack and others, that's what it's all about. Things that really hang together and operate locally and create it locally. That's how we have to do development.
Great. Okay, so I'm just looking at the other questions. I think we have touched on most of them. So the future of Foldoscope, I think, Manu shared his vision. He wants to have one in every pocket out there very soon. Hopefully, he'll succeed and we'll have 2. Is that what he said?
I want one.
Oh, you want one? You can take one on the way out.
Just make that one comment on this idea of scale-upism. There are 2 billion kids in the world, if you think about it. Does anybody want to guess how many bicycles are out there in the world? It's only 800 million bicycles out there. And it starts to tell you a little bit about when you're thinking about, okay, a pencil and products that just everyday life that integrates in people. Like the most important product that I get excited about is a soap. When you look at Lifebuoy and what Lifebuoy has done for global health, that's the type of a product you want to come and say, I designed that product. So there is this idea of, we can think of in a cycle for a company, we can think in a cycle of a problem, but there has to be this underlying layer. I'm really there with you, is the fact that there are the rate of increase of problems is much faster than any that we're even thinking about.
But in your case, a bicycle, they see what to ride, but you, to some degree, have to teach them what the problems are that you're looking for, although they'll find it all.
That's why you have to focus on curiosity. Yeah.
Great. So, the 3 kind of takeaways that I got from this. One is, I think with the tools that we have over here, I think it makes, it's not, the opportunities all around us, and I think challenges all around us, but I think, you can apply innovation sitting here or sitting anywhere else, but it's going to, and we need it to address those kinds of challenges that are in the future. And the second part of it is, you got to get the people engaged in the problems that you're solving. So you can't solve a problem over here and just drop it somewhere else. It's being engaged right from the beginning with the co-creating it with the customers that you have, and eventually, getting people excited about it too. So, I think what Manu is doing, so that you change that mentality. So it's not just a question of giving people tools in their hands, but make them the creators of the new solutions. So I think, in general, it's a really optimistic scenario out there. There are great challenges. I think the intellectuals sitting in this room, you ought to look at that as an opportunity. And I'm sure all of us over here are, more than happy to spend some time talking to you about it if you have any particular interest in how you can help, either with what they're doing or with ideas that you might have and you want to take it from beyond the idea stage. There's they got some stuff that you can play around with. I think there's one piece that's floating around at the back. If people have it, if you want to bring it back.
Can you bring my knee back?
Yeah. And we could take a break. I think we go into lunch right now.
Yeah, this is lunch, so.
Yeah, so I want to just thank the panel for, sharing their time, and I know